I want to say that it was my colleague Fred Dennis who came up with the idea for this show. He and I were crossing 7th Avenue, going out to lunch, talking as we often do about possible ideas for future shows. And he said, wouldn't it be fabulous to do a show about gays and fashion? And I immediately thought, this is brilliant. I don't think anyone's ever done anything on this, and it's such an important topic. In fact, of course, gays and lesbians have long been hidden from history, including the history of fashion. Yet fashion and style have been immensely important for the LGBTQ community for many years. Long before Oscar Wilde became an icon of queer sexuality, it turns out that there was a fraternity of pretty gentlemen, quote unquote, united by, quote, mutual love, end quote, who were influencing fashion. Back in the 18th century, the press described in particular 3 categories of men. First were the so-called mollies, effeminate, cross-dressing sodomites, who met in clubs, coffee houses, and bars, which were known as molly houses, where they socialized, cross-dressed in public, and interestingly had ceremonies including mock marriages. Then the second category were the macaronis, stylish men whose foppishness called into question ideas of masculinity. And then the third category were the so-called man milliners, men in the fashion trades who made or sold women's clothes. And they were described in the press as a club of young bachelors who invent fashions for ladies. By the mid-1880s, Wilde had repositioned himself as a dandy who celebrated what he called in another context, the dangerous and delightful distinction of being different. Now you might wonder, what was different about dandyism, since many heterosexual men were dandies? But the idea was if you paid a great deal of attention to every detail of masculine dress, it violated norms that insisted that men were not really supposed to be interested in dress. Fashion was radically transformed by a style known as la garçonne, which was named after a controversial novel about a modern liberated young woman who slept not only with a variety of men before marriage, but also with another woman. And this style was extremely controversial because it seemed to contemporaries to abolish the distinction between men and women. The post-war period was characterized by a real Kulturkampf, a very strong right-wing reaction against gays and lesbians, much stronger than had been the case in the 20s and 30s. So it's not just that fashion and society became gradually more welcoming. There have always been these back and forth movements where greater tolerance was followed by greater repression. The Stonewall riots, of course, took place on June 28, 1969, when police raided a Greenwich Village bar, triggering resistance, particularly among drag queens. And after that, there were distinct differences in the way LGBTQ people lived their lives and also the way they dressed. Pre-Stonewall, the most visible gay male style had been elegance, camp, or drag. And post-Stonewall, the clone emerged to symbolize modern macho gay style. Lesbian style also evolved as traditional butch femme dress codes were increasingly replaced by androgynous anti-fashion style. And then with time, LGBTQ styles also diversified under the influence of subcultures such as punk and disco. Now, towards the end of the 20th century, gay sensibility became more overt in fashion and advertising. And this was an expression both of gay pride and, I think, of straight consumers' fascination with images of distinction and nonconformity. Sexuality exerted a very increasingly strong influence on style during the 1990s. Another openly gay designer, Gianni Versace, drew on gay styles for many of his looks, both for men and women. Over the past century, many of the most influential designers have been gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender. And when Fred and I worked on this show for 2 years, in conjunction with an advisory council of professors at FIT and advisors from around the world, we felt that it was about time that the contributions of LGBTQ people were acknowledged.